Wednesday, 8 to 9 p.m. here on WeFM 99.9. Your health matters. Ask Dr. Thompson any burning question you have related to health. Your health matters. Dr. Thompson will examine healthcare, highlight important environmental issues, and look at what's hot in science and technology and the next wave of emerging diseases and health trends. So this and every Wednesday, join us 8 to 9 p.m. here in WeFM 99.9 because your health matters.
People's Pharmacy for all your pharmaceutical, skin, and body care needs. Located on Grenville Street in Kingstown. They open 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday to Saturday. Call them today at 784-456-1170. People's Pharmacy also stock vitamins and supplements, personal care items, toiletries, children and adult pampers, and much, much more. And of course, get your prescriptions filled by a friendly and professional pharmacist. People's Pharmacy. Come in today and let us serve you.
Good evening. This is Your Health Matters. This is Dr. Gerald Thompson, and it is wonderful to be back here in St. Vincent. A little tired. I just returned from New York, upstate New York, Rochester, where my daughter, Chelsea Thompson, graduated her master's in environmental engineering. And it was certainly kind of a whirlwind stop. Last Wednesday, I flew out of here thinking I would get into New York a little early, but I actually got in during the time the program started. I would have done the program right from the airport. But boy, driving, I really should have taken a plane from New York to Rochester, because driving from New York to Rochester has its perils. In fact, it's tiring. Really tiring. But this evening, I want to talk to you about disease. You know, there's a big contrast in terms of diseases that are new and diseases of the past. Kamal, and we're going to look and contrast both just to give you an idea of where we've come. Because there's now a term called chronic and degenerative illnesses or disease. And these type of disease, chronic diseases or chronic illnesses, are largely new to mankind. That is, they've only been around now for the last 200, 250 years. Let me tell you that cancer, diabetes, fibromyalgia, and multiple sclerosis have been termed as modern or man-made diseases because they were relatively rare until 200, 250 years ago. A lot of these diseases did not exist before or were very rare during the time of Chateaubriand, the time of Queen Elizabeth I, and so forth. Let me tell you that. But if these diseases are relatively new, why are so many people plagued with chronic illnesses today? And what are the root causes of these chronic illnesses that we need to be focusing on to cure them? Now, the term chronic illnesses versus acute illnesses must be established. Now, acute illness, I'm sure you would have heard about the bubonic plague. That was an acute illness that just came upon people suddenly. Or if somebody somebody falls down and breaks an arm, that's an acute illness, a sudden illness, an accident, you know? But long ago, you didn't have a car crash during the time of Chateaubriand, you know? You might have fallen off a cliff, or you might have, stumped a toe, right? Or you might have got choked by a sharp branch of a tree. Or in battle, you might be being hit by some stick or axe or sword or something of that nature. Now, what I want to tell you is that the word chronic really comes from the word Greek, the Greek word chronos. Chronos. And can be defined really as an illness that persists for a long time. Illnesses that persist for a long time. And usually more than 3 months. Once the illness is over 3 months, we call it chronic. That is, if you break a leg, you break an arm, that's sudden, you know? I mean, it may take months to heal, but the actual illness was the broken arm, not the fact you have a healing arm or a healing leg. Now, the thing about chronic diseases, too, is that they often tend to be progressive. In other words, even after 3 months, it doesn't just go away. It may get worse. You know, the environment for these illnesses can be set very early, and the roots may even be traced to childhood or something early in life sometimes. But cancer, for example, can take decades for development before becoming a diagnostic mass, a swelling. You know that? The cancer may be brewing for a little while, for months, for years. And like someone has prostate cancer, it's been brewing and building up for years. It ain't coming up suddenly in most cases. Chronic illnesses such as Alzheimer's disease start with a degenerative process taking place somewhere in the brain, right? A gradual deterioration of specific tissues in the brain over a period of time, right? The cause of this disease we don't know, but what happens is that these chronic diseases eventually start to cause loss of function, loss of structure, loss of tissue. And in the case of Alzheimer's, you know, the loss of tissue in relation to the brain leads to the Alzheimer's. Now, how about osteoporosis? Have you heard of that? Women suffer from that, especially after menopause. The estrogen that they produce from their ovary helps to maintain the integrity of their bones. So long after they've gone through menopause, right? The estrogen that was being produced in their ovary to help their bones to stay healthy, their bones become brittle and porous. And they could step off of a curve, or they could jump off a steps or a wall. And guess what? Their bones will break due to osteoporosis. Now, so diseases that we call degenerative mean that they sometimes no longer generate the strength or the efficiency or the proper structure that they once had or the function that they once had decades ago, because they are degenerative diseases. And it means that the health of those structures and your health in general has been degenerating over a period of time. So simply put, the body runs out of battery power. It runs out of energy, runs out of its structural makeup. It runs out of gas. And the switch might be flipped on, but there's no light to be seen. This is what we're talking about that happens. And I want to make a contrast, though, and go back a little bit. I'm going to come back and talk about these modern diseases. Let's go back in time. Do you know that diseases of long ago killed a lot of people? Let me start off. And I want you to understand what I'm talking about. In 1918, there was something called the Spanish flu, the Spanish influenza. It caused a pandemic. This influenza, we now term it as H1N1. And this is the way we classify the influenza virus. H1N1, H1N5, H5N this and 3. Or we play games with these nomenclature, but boy, it's an influenza, but it's a bad one. And in 1918, just around the time of World War I, this broke out. It killed 50 million people around the world. 50 million people around the world. In other words, it killed anywhere up to about 5% of the global population at that time, you know? And it went worldwide. It is unclear whether the Spanish flu finally came to the Caribbean, but it did, you know? And it did kill a few people, but it didn't do the sort of devastation, because at that time, this Spanish influenza was a virus. And can I tell you that it was a time that the world had not fully discovered viruses. They had not fully discovered there was such a thing as viruses. Some 30 years before, Louis Pasteur had discovered the term bacteria. But at that time, they still hadn't realized there was a smaller organism called a virus. I want to go back even further. There was something called the Justinian plague. This was 541 to 549 after the death of Christ. That was very early on. Happened in North Africa. It was caused by the bubonic plague. It killed also 50 million people. Anywhere between 50 and 100 million people. It killed a ton of people, right? And this plague, it mainly happened in Europe, North Africa. It killed 25% of the European population. It killed a quarter of the European population at the time, I'm telling you. You know, people used to barricade themselves inside their houses. But the bubonic plague is a bacteria that is picked up in rats, and fleas that feed on the rats and feed on humans come and bite you, and then you basically catch the bubonic plague, right? In those days, rats were rampant, and that helped to spread. Now, let me come back again in more modern times. HIV/AIDS. HIV/AIDS has killed 44 million people, starting in 1981, right? But we could go back again to other forms of bubonic plague called the Black Death, you know, and let me tell you, bubonic plague. The bubonic plague, the bacteria from the bubonic plague would infect your lymph nodes. So that underneath your arm, a swelling would occur like a balloon, like a ball. Let me put it this way. You see, like this headphone, a balloon would build up underneath your arm hair, and it's full of blood. And when that bursts, when that blood vessel bursts, all kind of stuff would come out. That was the bubonic plague. But let me tell you, what was worse was catching the pneumonic plague. where these same balls of swollen blood, imagine them inside your lungs. Imagine them inside your lungs and building up. And when they burst inside your lungs, let me tell you something. The person starts to cough out blood. I'm being horrible today. Come on. They start to cough out blood, and everyone around them getting blood cough out in their face, gunk coming out. And imagine you being a husband or a wife taking care of your wife, of your sibling, or your daughter, and they have the plague, especially the pneumonic plague, and they're coughing up blood, and you love them and you're being around, and you then catch it yourself, because that's what happens, you know. But as I point out, they've had these illnesses such as bubonic plague that have ravaged the earth. You know, there was an illness that the Aztecs developed. It wiped out 15 million Mexicans at the time the Spanish had come across. There were several diseases, right? The first one that affected the Aztecs was smallpox. Smallpox. In 1520, I mean, Columbus would have come across here in like 1890 something. Well, some 25 years later, Spanish were back, and many of them harbored smallpox. They were smallpox carriers, so the smallpox wasn't killing them, but they were carriers of the germ called smallpox, another virus. And the Aztecs, Mexican, had never been exposed to that kind of virus before. So boy, this thing ravaged through the place, killing almost 8 million people. But then some 20 years later, in the same Mexico, another germ broke out, now not smallpox, a one called Salmonella. Have you heard of that before? Another bacteria called Salmonella. It's a form of poisoning food. Boy, I tell you something. That killed 15 million people. These things wiped out the indigenous population of Mexico, you know? And there have been many other type of real bad diseases. The Hong Kong flu, the Russian typhus, all sorts of these diseases. The point I'm trying to make is that these illnesses, when you caught them, they were acute illnesses, they were sudden illnesses. These illnesses, you would catch it. And what will be worse is if you decide, boy, a disease break out, I am running. And you pack your bags and so forth. And then you travel a whole set of miles somewhere else. But guess what? As you travel, someone in your party may have been incubating that same germ. And that's how it spread. That's how it spread. Now, I'm just giving you an idea that in the olden days of cholera, bubonic plague, of smallpox, tens of millions of people died. It reshaped the whole world, the whole globe. Now, what's happening with modern diseases is that it's not something that's sudden. It's not an acute illness. It's a chronic illness, a chronic degenerative disease. And these are the new diseases. As we found antibiotics. Let me tell you, the bubonic plague, penicillin kills the bubonic plague germ. But penicillin was only invented in 1930. So over the centuries, all the people who died of the bubonic plague. Remember, there was the bubonic plague in England. There was the bubonic plague in Europe. There was a bubonic plague in Jerusalem. There was a bubonic plague in many parts of the world, Turkey, Africa, all sorts of things. But boy, I tell you, penicillin tend to wipe that disease out. Truthfully, I got to tell you something. In 1991, I was practicing in New York, and I hadn't realized that I was one of a very few number of Black infectious disease specialists. And I got a call from somebody who said that there was someone in Texas who had been diagnosed with bubonic plague, and they were Black. And when they read up, they couldn't believe this, so they thought that it was discriminatory and that because they were Black, they were trying to put this on top of them. And they wanted to fly me out to Texas to review the case and tell them if this was real. I hadn't been to Texas before, so it was interesting. They were paying my flight, and I took up the challenge. And I went over there and went to the lab and so forth, and lo and behold, yes. You know, there are about 5 cases of bubonic plague in the United States every year. There are 5 cases of bubonic plague in the United States every year. But because there's penicillin, that's one injection, one jab in the buttocks, another one, you know? Basically, the bubonic plague is easy to treat. I think we have an early call here. Hello, good day.
Right. Hello.
Good evening. Yes, you're on. How can I help you?
Doc?
Yes. Oh, hi, Dave. How are you? What's up?
Yeah, man, I can't allow you to be talking alone as we ain't talking to nobody. You see what I mean?
No, Dave.
You're
Dave.
talking and
No, Dave.
nobody responding to you or asking any questions.
Dave.
Okay,
No, Dave.
what
Dave.
going on?
Yeah, that's all right, Dave. You could ask me a question, but Dave, I usually do a monologue beforehand, and then
So I'm all into the man. I didn't realize.
No. I do a monologue beforehand, and then at 7:45, I open up the line to be able to take questions, usually on what I am talking about or on any subject that somebody else raised. So don't I am not just here to answer questions. Well, Doc, I got a pain here. What do you think it is? Or so, you know, it isn't.
I'm telling you about no pain. Because
No. I'm not saying that. I was bringing up as an example. But I invite persons to be able to call. Don't feel sorry for me because I'm doing a monologue and I'm talking and nobody's answering, because people are listening and they're listening to what I'm trying to put over to them, because I'm trying to educate them on a particular theme. And then hopefully people be able to ask questions. But you are allowed to call me early, late, anytime, to ask me and make a comment on the subject I'm talking about or on any other subject at all. Yeah.
As I hear you speaking about some of these ancient, if I can use that word, diseases or problems we had in our health at one time.
Yes.
It reminds me when I went to school for the first time in Sylvan's and the Grenadines. Having come back from Aruba.
Aruba, yeah.
I was surprised to see this school. I don't want to call it school, but it was one of those country schools. And I remember seeing people, students at that time, barefooted, had to, when they came to school, teachers used to have them, what do you call it? Jigger, cleaning, digging. You know about that? I mean, you're a doctor, of course.
Trigger, as they call it. Trigger. Yes, trigger.
I think it was jigger. Okay.
Yeah, you could call it jigger.
So,
however it's it's called trigger.
So those, I mean, these I love to identify, everything like how it is. I mean, we didn't have it like this as it is now. We had our because of poverty or lack of proper health care and all of that, we had these problems. But some people don't like to talk about the past because they feel embarrassed or they feel shame, right? I mean, thank God I didn't have those I didn't have those problems, but I went to school where I remember some guys and it's something that put your foot out of shape. Had your feet looking so ugly. I can't forget those days.
Yes.
And in those days too, I remember as a young schoolboy seeing mumps and some of the common things around that time and so on. Um, well, I end up getting measles after after a while. I thought for a while. I end up getting measles and chicken pox. And I tell you, when I remember, it wasn't pleasant at all, especially these things just itching and itching and itching.
Well,
I used to feel like going in and bathe, and my parents, no, you can't bathe with these things on
yes.
your skin and so on. So
Yes.
that was like a plague.
Yes.
Well,
Well,
and I say that. What about those people that had leprosy? Is leprosy still
yes.
around in 2025? Do we still have lepers or however you call them?
Well, we do, but let me say something. Now, have you ever heard of something called yaws?
Yeah,
Yaz.
yeah, I know about yaws. Where that used to come out again? By a mouth or something?
Well, there's yaws and trigger. Now, there is a bacteria that causes syphilis. Yes, Anne? It's called Treponema pallidum. But there's a cousin to syphilis that causes yaws. And these older disease trigger all the different worms that people used to have, hookworm, tapeworm, all these things. They existed not only in these countries, but in Europe and England and France and all those places too. You'll be surprised how these existed in Kentucky and America and all these rural communities like this. Now,
when you say Kentucky, people stop eating.
No, but you see, yes, I know. But let me say, many worms, like hookworm, they're able to bore through your feet. Because we didn't have toilets, people went and defecated in the bushes, or they defecated in a lot of places. So the germs, the spores and so forth in these germs would be there. And as you walk with your bare feet, they could bore through the sole of your feet, get into your system, travel up through your lymphatic system, as we call it, into your blood and into your liver and all these sorts of things. There are ponds that people used to bathe in. They used to have it even in St. Lucia. There used to be a river that certain type of things used to grow there, and anybody bathe inside there could actually catch these things. They've eliminated these things.
Well, if you stick up in a while, I can tell you, I did a little bit of science, and I work in St. Lucia on what they call the bilharzia snail that gives that sickness or disease you call schistosomiasis.
Schistosomiasis.
As we say, remember something? Bilharzia or schistosomiasis, and the name bilharzia came from the founder or the discoverer of that
I want to surprise you. I want to surprise you even further. Do you know, around the time of the 10th century, disease in Europe was rampant. At the time, there was no such thing as bathing. People never used to bathe. And then there was a group of black, they were Muslim, but a culture called the Moors. They were very intelligent black that came from North Africa. And they came and they invaded Spain. And they went partially to France. And they brought in new methods of tapping into groundwater, canals, bathing, the use of soap, and all this sort of thing. You know, around that time, people like Queen Elizabeth, or just after that, Queen Elizabeth and those people never used to bathe and so forth. They used to try to sprinkle themselves with some lime juice and some orange peel and all those sort of things, snuff boxes to smell better. But the whole idea of public health started to emerge as a result of this black grouping called the Moors. And it was a time in which these old diseases like bubonic plague was being spread because of rats. And anywhere you had garbage being dumped and rats breathing and the rats becoming infected with fleas and this, that. And so it promoted the disease. And
you take me back in time there, because I remember some of that history that I would have studied or read somewhere.
Yes. But I'm only saying that all these diseases like bubonic plague and other illnesses, we only started to discover antibiotic tablets and injections after 1930 and after 1945. Because when penicillin was first discovered in 1930, people thought, that's a joke. No such thing as antibiotics. It was only during the war when people started to have bombs going off and blowing off their legs and gangrene started to set in, that then people say, boy, let's try this penicillin. It started to work. And then other antibiotics. And as a result, we were able to cure a lot of illnesses. And that's when those sort of things were being introduced to St. Vincent. You know, penicillin and other antibiotics started coming in the 50s and the 60s. And a lot of people with Yars and trigger and syphilis and other things like that then started to be cured because these antibiotic medication was now available. But our grandparents didn't have them available and suffered as a result of it.
And it's good that people like you who went to England, educated, part of your schooling was in England. And let me tell you this, I learned so much from our Caribbean Vincentians who went up, because I have relatives in England.
Yeah.
And I remember a particular relative of mine said, you know, those people, the women them don't bathe, you know, they're afraid of water. They ain't like us. And he explained the scenario to me one time after he fell in love with a white woman there, and you know, he just couldn't deal with her. He had to drop her.
It isn't quite so, Dave. Let me just say, I remember living in England.
Tell me your experience.
No, but living in England as a young man, they didn't have natural gas to give you hot water. So, but they had some gas where you had to put in 25 pence into a meter and turn the meter, and it will give you hot water for about 5 minutes. And about 5 minutes. But so if you wanted more hot water, you had to put in twice the amount. If you wanted more, you want to put in 3.
Keep
so
repeating.
You didn't have the money to do that every single night. Down here in St. Vincent, we could bathe with cold water or go to a river. But in England, you can't go to the River Thames and bathe. It's polluted. And you can't go in the street and there's a standpipe in the street. There was no standpipe in the street. So you can't go to Connery and go by the standpipe or Connery River. You could bathe in those places, but not in England. And because it's also cold during the winter, you can't bathe with ice. You can't bathe with snow. You understand? You freeze,
Yeah,
you will
I
freeze
mean,
your nuts off, if I could say that. You know what I mean?
in
Dave.
fact, I remember as a youngster growing up, I remember they used to talk all these stories about life in England.
Yeah.
And they said, what? In winter time, if a man is urinating, you know, that before it hit the ground, it's frozen.
Well,
The urine
in
is
some
frozen. I
places,
don't know which was that.
some places, maybe further past Scotland and so forth. Anyway, Dave, thank you very much
Yeah.
for calling. You know,
Yeah, man, cool.
Dave,
Mhm.
thank you
All
very
right.
much. Yeah. Yeah. Now we were just reflecting on these older illnesses, and I was trying my best to create a contrast that modern diseases we face today are not like what we were just talking about with Dave, Yaz and trigger and cholera and salmonella and all these kind of things. No, we're seeing a rise in diabetes. You know, 50 years ago, diabetes wasn't even in the top 50 diseases as killers of man. Today, it's in the top 10, and it's expected that within the next 5 years, it'll be in the top 5. Heart disease, heart attacks, and so forth. 100 years ago, people never used to really have a whole set of heart attacks and all them kind of things. Heart attacks is a new type of disease, degenerative diseases. Alzheimer's is new. You may say, oh, okay, people didn't live long enough to develop the cancers and the Alzheimer's. They died of some infectious disease. That is true. These infectious diseases, I pointed out, you kill millions. Quarter of the population of Europe, 10% of the population of the world, wiped out a lot of people in Mexico. When Columbus first came and he landed in Hispaniola, those places, there was a Taino, the Taino Indians. Do you know within 100 years, all the Taino had been wiped out? They never had an immune system that had been exposed to measles, that Dave talked about, to chicken pox, to mumps and rubella. No, but as people started coming over from Europe with these diseases, they wiped out these people. These people were like gone down by disease. So, but we're now facing a modern change over the last 100, 200 years of these modern degenerative diseases. And it is killing in a new way. You know? So you may not have had YAS and so forth today as we used to have in the 1930s and 1940s. You don't have worms because of people wearing shoes and so forth. So the worms in the soil eventually die out. You know, the worms come out. The worms rely on somebody walking on them so they could bore through, get into your intestines, and multiply thousands of worms and hope that there's no toilet and you go and you defecate in many, many different places that people walk on and spread. But even as people defecated and ain't got no toilet, and now they build a whole set of toilets all over the place, flush toilets inside the house, you know, people got shoes on so that the worms and can't bore through your foot anymore. I know some people still walk barefoot, but it's okay because 10, 15, 20 years ago, a lot of those worms died out. You know what I mean? There was no feet to bore through, you know? This is interesting. But as I say, YAS and those sort of things of the 1930s, 1940s have gone. But guess what? Diabetes has now crept in and is the new killer. So what we're seeing, common symptoms of degeneration. We are also seeing allergies. You know what I mean? We've seen allergies too. We've seen allergies to bat dust, cockroach dust, allergies to paint. Then people had paint before, allergies to a whole set of chemicals in your carpet. Then people had carpets before, made out of all these chemicals, these you know. And then there's inflammation. The chemicals that we're taking into our bodies, thinking it's food, the chemicals in the food to make the food last longer, to make the food look prettier, to make the food look redder. For red food must look redder, for green food must look greener. Carrots must look more orange. We produce some of the best carrots in Rose Hall, those places. But there was some pretty orange carrots coming from Canada via Trinidad. So guess what? The housewives say, boy, those carrots look prettier. You know? So let me buy those instead of the big natural carrots from Rose Hall. But those carrots may have artificial coloring, GMO development, all sorts of things like that. And they have been producing inflammation. And don't talk about pain. Inflammation and pain. Pain is such a big illness today. Do you know, Kamal, I could hit you with a 2x4 piece of wood or a hammer. I will cause some injury, and that cause you pain. Or you could get a nerve damage, and that'll cause you pain. But what's happening now is there's a new type of pain called nociplastic pain, phantom pain. In America, I used to see a lot of patients with phantom pain, and I got fed up. I said, all these patients just want drugs. All these patients just want narcotics. They want this medication. I said, what, you know? Then I started realizing as they did the research that these people had real pain, but the wiring of their nervous system was wrong. It wasn't no nerve damage. Like if I were to switch on a light, and instead of the light going on, the television goes on. Or let's say you switch on a light and your car starts up. Eh? I'm being ridiculous now. Or you switch on your light and you switch on the light switch and your iron that you iron clothes with goes on. Or your fridge goes off when you switch on the light. This is the wiring in our body has gone through some funny process due to inflammation and so forth. And people are experiencing real pain. Headaches. I can imagine somebody having a headache if somebody hit them on the head. If I chop you in your head, Kamal, you heard that term before? Somebody get chopped? Yeah? Somebody get chopped in the head? I'm not talking about chop with a cutlass either. Stop with a stone, you get chopped with a stone. But yeah, you get the listeners, you hear. Have you ever get chopped before? I'm not talking about chop up with a cutlass, a machete or so. I talk about somebody chop you with a stone. Yeah, old time term. I'm sure Dave get chopped with a stone when he was young. He looked as if he was avaricious and so forth to get chopped with stone and so forth. I'm sure a lot of people that chopped Dave with stone when he was young. You know, sorry, I'm saying that jokingly. But do you know that headaches are being caused by all sorts of different things now? And again, inflammation, exhaustion, depression, tension, sleeplessness. Do you know about 20% of the population suffer from inability to sleep? Can't sleep at night. All these are new phenomena. Long ago, people didn't have no nice bed.
Was a Bob Marley what song? Stone ground was my bed last night. Eh? And rock was my pillow too. Is that how it go, Kamal? Eh? Stone ground was my bed last night. And rock was my pillow too. I'm sure I have it wrong. You know? I'm sure I have it wrong. But those people slept still. You know, you see in Westerns, the people go on their tent and they sleep and they wake up and so forth. Now a lot of people can't sleep. What about indigestion? These new illnesses, indigestion, their bowels and SIBO, the bacteria in your gut becoming overgrown and causing all kind of problems. These are problems, and a lot of them are coming also because of taking too much medication, prescription. You know, I was talking about antibiotics, penicillin killing the plague germ. But if somebody decides, you know what, I'm going to take penicillin and ampicillin for 2-3 months, make sure I really kill the germs. You know, it can kill so many of the good germs that it can cause a whole ton of problems. And we are seeing overuse of prescription medication, of antibiotics, toxic chemicals, pollutants that we don't know about, we only hear about. I lived in New Jersey and didn't realize that miles away, not too many miles away, they had buried a whole set of chemicals, radon, nuclear stuff, radioactive stuff that they were using in research and development, but didn't know how to get rid of, you know? And, you know, there's a big market for that, you know. We could make a lot of money here in St. Vincent, you know. All we need to say is that barges with toxic stuff could come and dump the material on our shores and pay us money. You know how like El Salvador is taking money to house prisoners? And how I gotta say this, how you could take money to sell passports, or how you could take money. We could start up something where we take some of the toxic chemicals that people don't want for millions of dollars, you know? I'm saying that jokingly, right? Because all these things, no doubt, will have some profound effect. There's a lot of food today that's allergenic. Allergenic means they call it allergies. And there's even, I imagine slavery in the days of slavery. But you know, Kamal, today there are a lot of people under stress based on the work they're doing and who they're working for and the psychological stress that employers are putting on their workers. But can we contrast that with slavery and indentured servitude? I wonder what kind of stress slaves would have been on, working day in and day out. Would they have been on the psychological? Of course, they must have been. And then lack of exercise. I imagine glutton used to exist long ago. But boy, today, there's a rare lack of exercise, nutrient deficiencies, dental problems. I'm going on. Modern illnesses have really taken hold. Now, I'm not saying we should bring back cholera and bring back the bubonic plague and bring back these diseases. I'm glad we got rid of them. But we have to try and see how these new diseases we are able to control, right? And we basically can get rid of these in some way. And I want to say that the term prevention is better than cure is so true. But all these illnesses that have been mentioned to you, sleeplessness, indigestion, all these sort of things, how
how do you really get rid of them? You know? And how do you prevent them? And we have to start discussing. I'm going to be talking a little bit more about these things over the next few weeks, right? And we have to understand that there is a need for a lifestyle change. So, we went through a lifestyle change of wearing shoes, wearing better clothing, having better housing, indoor toilets. We have air conditioning now and fans. We have all sorts of things. We have pipe-borne water. We have electricity. You know, electricity came to places like Chateaubriand and those sort of places in the 1960s. Did you know that? Eh? They didn't have a power generation, they had something in Kingstown and so. And we now have cell phones and so. You know, we had telephones, but we only got cell phones in the late 90s, 2000 across there. It's been 22 years since we started liberalizing cell phones and so forth. It's really and truly been just about 25 to 30 years. Well, you can imagine you can't do without these things now. You know, WhatsApp and Facebook, only less than 15 years old. Less than 15 years old. So young kids, a young 12, 15-year-old wonder, what did you all do before this? You know? I am saying all these things because we've come from an era changing our lifestyle. But what are the bad things that we have adopted in our lifestyle? And I am telling you that the epidemic of headaches, back pain, the epidemics of depression, of sleeplessness, of diabetes and glutton and the amount of sugar we consume and all that kind of stuff, it is really big. So the new lifestyle, we've gone way overboard, but there's some good stuff in it. But how do we weed it out? How do we sort it out? We don't want to go back to the old ages of bubonic plague and so, and YARS. But how do we now make sure that as we live longer, we enjoy it that much better? Ladies and gentlemen, we're at the end of the program, and we're talking a lot more about these issues, these new diseases that we've been facing. We've left the bad ones, but we have to make sure our lifestyle basically change so we can enjoy life a lot better. This is Dr. Gerald Thompson signing out, or bidding you. I think a call is just coming in, but sadly it's come a bit too late. Bidding you a very good evening and good night.
People's Pharmacy, for all your pharmaceutical, skin and body care needs. Located on Grenville Street in Kingstown. They open 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday to Saturday.